joining us right now from the Draft Wire, is obviously does not have a big ego because he's willing to slum it and hang out with us on draft day, the 12th most popular morning sports radio show for mid-markets. That's according to a national study.
Yeah.
Luke Easterling. Luke, it's Dave. That's Kyle. It's Jay. Good morning. How are you?
Oh, try again.
Oh, hi, Luke. Good morning. How are you?
Hey, good morning, guys. How are you?
Good. I'll bet you're busy today.
Really? Is there something happening today?
You know, I'm being facetious, but I want to ask you, and Kyle, you can weigh in because Kyle writes things. Is it oftentimes when I would cover boxing or mixed martial arts, for example, I used to ask that question, boy, today's a crazy day for you. And the response was almost always the same. No, actually, today's not because all the hard work has been done to this point. Today's going to be one of the smoother days. I'm guessing that doesn't apply to people writing about the NFL draft.
It does to a certain extent. I think the hay is definitely in the barn as of, early this morning. Right now, it really is kind of the calm before the storm. Right now, you've put out everything in terms of previewing everything and playing out the different scenarios, the mock drafts, the rankings. They're all done. I mean, now it's just chasing the rumors and trying to see what's what. And it's a lot of smoke and not a lot of fire until the first pick actually goes on the clock. So right now is my time to try to breathe a little bit. Because once the draft actually starts, between then and sometime on Sunday when I remember my own name, then it's going to be crazy for that 72 hours.
All right, Luke. So you're looking at your mock draft. I mean, I don't know if you are, but let's pretend that you are. You're looking at your mock draft, the first round. What pick in the first round are you most confident? You're like, maybe the rest of this goes to heck because of a trade, but I'm super confident that this pick is going to be right.
I think it's number 2. I think it's Nick Bosa at number 2 to the 49ers because I think right now, we have a 50-50 shot at number 1 of it being Kyler Murray or Quinnen Williams. I think it's a coin flip really right now. And I think that the Jets, depending on what happens at that pick, they could go Quinnen Williams. The rumors are that they really like Ed Oliver too. I think they could use an edge guy more than an interior guy, so Josh Allen has to be in that conversation. I think they'd love to have Bosa on the board at 3. I don't think it's going to happen. I think that I'm most certain that Bosa's not going number 1, and therefore he's absolutely going number 2.
And when you look at the Raiders too, and I know that your guys' job is basically to predict who you think is going to pick what and where, and the Raiders are picking 4th right now. Isn't there kind of that not so outside shot too that we're dealing with John Gruden and Mike Mayock? Isn't there kind of, I'm not saying Mike Ditka trading all his picks for Ricky Williams type of stuff, but don't we kind of have in the back of our heads that the Raiders could do something that completely throws this whole thing on its ass?
I mean, and aren't we all hoping that happens?
Yes,
really?
yes.
Don't we want
That's
that?
the goal, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want Oakland to trade up to 1 for Kyler Murray. I want the chaos to start as soon as possible, and I want everyone to lose their minds. That's what I root for every single year.
That's the same thing here. If the Raiders just decided, hey, we're trading all of our first round picks to trade up to number 1 and draft Drew Lock. That's the ideal.
Please.
That's literally that. My reaction to anything draft related like that is that GIF of Elmo with all the fire behind him. Burn it all. I want all the fire. I want all the craziness. I want entire Raider Nation collective to just lose their mind. I want all of that. It's just too entertaining.
Luke. If we're sitting here in a couple days looking back on the first round, who's the guy that you would say, or guys, if you have a couple in mind, most likely to, we call it the Aaron Rodgers. Who are the guys that we might be looking at in that green room for a while that maybe go lower than we thought?
I don't have the list of the guys invited in front of me, but it sounds like, we thought DK Metcalf would be the number 1 receiver off the board. It's sounding more and more like he may not be the first or even second receiver off the board, depending on who's picking and who they like. So the quarterbacks, it's always going to be weird. We've always seen drafts where there's one guy that trickles through. We've heard a lot of talk about Daniel Jones, Dwayne Haskins, and Kyler Murray. Is Drew Lock the guy that kind of sits around for a while and is on the board until 28 at the Chargers, even 30 to the Packers, 32 to the Patriots? Is he the guy that has to wait around a while? wouldn't it be funny for the Packers to scoop up another quarterback who sits on the board for most of the first round to replace the guy they did that with last time?
Wow.
That'd be wild.
All for it. Jay?
Luke, Dave Gettleman has a 38-year-old quarterback named Eli Manning that most of us assume is on the downward spiral. Pick 6 and 17. What are the Giants doing?
Well, I mean, from everything he said publicly, it sure looks like that's news to him, that Eli Manning is 38 years old, because everything he said to the contrary is similar to what Denver's been doing with Joe Flacco. I wasn't aware that 34-year-old quarterbacks were in their prime, but that's good news for me, because I guess that means I'm still in mine. So there's still hope there. The Giants absolutely have to get a quarterback in this draft. I think they had to get a quarterback in last draft, but they got, in my opinion, a Hall of Fame caliber player in Saquon Barkley, so it's hard to really fault them for that in terms of getting the best available player. But this is what happens. Now you're in a draft where the quarterback class is not as good as it was last year, in my opinion, and you're picking 6 and 17, which means if you want one of the top 1 or 2 quarterbacks in this draft, you're probably going to have to move up to get him. So you're in a really unique spot. I think that Gettleman would prefer to build the trenches on both sides of the ball. So whatever pick he doesn't, let's include that early, his second-round pick he's got, so 3 top 40 picks. I think they have to come away with a quarterback, a trench player on offense, and a trench player on defense, whether that's interior, outside, offensive tackle, outside linebacker, edge guy, and an interior defender. Those are the 3 picks I think they have to come away with, and whatever order it works out. I'm just wondering if there is a quarterback that they really like, say it is Daniel Jones or Dwayne Haskins, maybe they have to use that second rounder to move up to get that guy.
What quarterbacks do you like? It seems like Kyler Murray is kind of at the top of everybody's board, but then Daniel Jones has risen pretty late. There's Drew Lock, there's Dwayne Haskins. What order do you have those guys in, and how many of them do you think go in the first round?
I think 4 of them go in the first round. I think they could be all off the board by 15. I think we could see a scenario, obviously, like I said, where one of them, probably Drew Lock, is on the board longer than that. But my top 5, I still have Dwayne Haskins at number 1. I think he's just ahead of Kyler Murray, in my opinion. They're number 5 and number 6 overall on my overall ranking, so not a whole lot separating them, but I just like Haskins a little bit more. Number 3, I do have Drew Lock. Number 4 is the interesting one for me. I have Will Grier ahead of Daniel Jones.
Oh, wow.
Will Grier from West Virginia. So I think, but again, there's a huge gap, in my opinion, between Haskins and Murray, who again are at 5 and 6 on my board. And then I think Drew Lock is in the 30s, and Will Grier and Daniel Jones both barely sneak into my top 50. So the fact that 4 of those guys would come off the board in the top 32, if not, top 15 picks, just shows how much the NFL is all about. If you don't have a quarterback, you got to find one.
We talked earlier about the receiver class, and I think that's going to be a big deal for the 49ers, because I think they pick up a receiver with one of their day 2 picks if they don't trade up into the back end of round 1. Who's at the top of the board for you at receiver? Because it seems like a long time it was DK Metcalf, but then his teammate A.J. Brown has risen up boards. Hollywood Brown from Oklahoma. Where do you stand on this receiver class in terms of who goes in the first round and who might go early in day 2?
Yeah, I have 2 first-round grades on receivers. That's Metcalf and Hakeem Butler from Iowa State. I love his combination of size and speed and ability to dominate in the red zone. So it's not a really top-heavy receiver class if you're looking for that elite, complete wide receiver. I don't know if we have one of those in this class. Again, everybody wants there to be a Julio Jones or a Calvin Johnson in every draft, and I always, you have to remind people those guys are special and rare for a reason. It's because they don't come around every year, and I don't think there's one of those players in this draft. Metcalf obviously dominated the combine, but his skill set isn't nearly as complete as a receiver as those guys like Calvin Johnson and Julio Jones. So only have the 2 first-round grades, but I have 8 guys graded in the second round. That's N'Keal Harry, A.J. Brown, Kelvin Harmon from North Carolina State, Deebo Samuel, Riley Ridley from Georgia, Hollywood Brown, who we talked about, who I'm a good bit lower on than most people. I know you can't hit what you can't catch, but I'm really skeptical about a 166-pound wide receiver being able to stand up in the NFL. Kind of reminds me of John Ross from Washington, a guy who was undersized and had dealt with durability issues in college, ended up being a top 10 pick because of his speed, and so far that hasn't worked out so well for the Bengals. He's continued to stay banged up and hasn't really had a chance to show that off. But J.J. Arcega-Whiteside and Paris Campbell are 2 other guys that I have in the second round there. So if you don't, I would not be surprised to see teams who are receiver needy, particularly throughout the first round, look at the depth of this class on day 2 and say, you know what, we can get a starting caliber receiver that's not much different than the guy we could take here in the middle of the first round. I feel comfortable that we can get a very similar player 30 picks from now.
Luke Easterling of the Draft Wire with us. We talked earlier about players that might slip. Montez Sweat has become an interesting story. There was, you heard rumblings back at Michigan State, and the Spartans did a lot to protect him. And ended up coming out that he had a weed problem back then, and he admitted so as much himself. Then has a tremendous career at Mississippi State. They find the possible heart issue, and you've heard both sides of this. Some teams flat out think he's a medical reject. Others have said, and I'm quoting here, that he is an extremely low case in their opinion for sudden cardiac arrest. But when you hear heart issues in football players, we saw that with, Maurice Hurst a couple years ago where he slipped to the 5th round, I think. Where's your read on Montez Sweat? And is he one of those guys that could just go all over the place when the night's done?
Yeah, I mean, this is where the job that we have as media scouts, this is where our access stops.
Yeah.
This is one of the things that makes our job difficult if you're doing this job to project guys and try to be right all the time. That's not really what I try to do, and this is a really big reason why. It's literally impossible for me to have an accurate, run on what is going to happen with him because I don't have a team. I don't have team doctors that I can rely on for those results. I'm not somebody who, cultivates those sources to try to dig for that medical info. So, and honestly, even if you could, you have 32 teams, 32 franchises, 32 front offices and medical staffs that are going to evaluate this just like they would a free agent or a guy you might be trading for that you need to go through a physical to make sure he's healthy. Everybody's going to have a different read on this, and it's going to be impossible to project where he's going to land because, like you said, we could have half the league who has him completely off the board. We could have half the league who thinks he's fine medically and therefore will just evaluate him on that skill set. And, again, you have a guy who is highly productive and consistently productive in the SEC, put up big numbers. He looks like Julius Peppers with that frame and that athleticism. I don't think his upside is quite that high because you're talking about a Hall of Fame player, and I'm wary of ever making that comparison. Yeah. But if everything checks out, and Maurice Hurst is a perfect example, he's stayed healthy since he was drafted. He's looking like one of the biggest steals from that draft. If that happens again and Sweat's available on the back end of the first round, honestly wouldn't be surprised to see a team like the Raiders who have swung on that and taken that chance and succeeded with it so far. Maybe they try to strike again.
Seems like every year, as we talk to Luke Easterling of the Draft Wire, it seems like every year there's a player or two that kind of sneaks into that like 20 to 32 range that we thought like, oh, this is a second round guy, but he ends up going in the first. Is there anybody you're circling that a lot of people have in the second round that you think could sneak up into the back half of the first round?
I tell you what, there's one fit that I really, really like. And I think it would surprise a lot of people, but I think the more they think about the fit and the particular team and the offense they run, I think it makes a lot of sense. If you're the Baltimore Ravens at 22 and you need a wide receiver for Lamar Jackson, a true number one wide receiver, they have a ton of tight ends. We make fun of them for continuing to invest in tight ends and draft them high and give them big money, but they have the tight ends they need to run that offense. I think what that offense would be looking for in a number one receiver is much different than most other NFL offenses. When I look at a player in college who has blazing speed, who has the frame to be a number one receiver and make plays after the catch, but did most of his damage on quick screens and hitches and plays where he's able to get the ball in his hands quickly. I think that fits very much what the offense of the Baltimore Ravens would want for Lamar Jackson, playing to his strengths and trying to not expose his flaws as a deep ball passer. What if Paris Campbell from Ohio State ends up sneaking into the first round because he just fits so well with what Baltimore needs?
That'd be a huge surprise. That'd be wild.
It would on one hand, but 4.3 speed gets you drafted high, man. And
sure.
When you run like that at the combine, especially at 6'1", 208, he's not Marquise Brown. He's not a tiny guy. He's a big enough receiver. I really would not be surprised to see a team again because it's just such a good fit in my opinion. He could go ahead of a lot of receivers that we wouldn't expect.
We here out in Northern California, we're a lot of Niner fans out here. George Kittle in college didn't have a ton of production. I think surpassed his college production in his rookie season in the NFL. Went in the 5th round, wound up setting a record for receiving yards by a tight end this year. Is there anyone in college that you're looking at and you're going, man, his production just doesn't match what I see on tape? He's going to be way better than his college stats show.
I think it's got to be Josh Jacobs, the running back from Alabama. I think everybody brings up the fact that how can a guy that finished 3rd on his team in rushing yardage be the number 1 running back in the NFL draft? And I'll tell you why, because a couple of years ago there was a guy that finished 3rd on his team in rushing yards the last year he was in college, and his name is Alvin Kamara. So, looking at that type everything is different. There's variables and the reasons why certain things are. You had ahead of him, you had Damian Harris, who was a 3-year starter and a 1,000-yard rusher every year. You had Najee Harris, who was a 5-star recruit and a fantastic athlete. I think, honestly, the fact that Josh Jacobs did not play a whole lot at Alabama is part of what makes him the most attractive running back in this class, because you don't have a guy who has 700 touches under his belt over a 4-year career in college. He's not been worn down. He's not the workhorse that has been used up before he's getting to the NFL. You're getting a guy who has tons of tread on his tires and is just, that's going to be of so much value, I think, to NFL running backs, that being devalued as they have been. I think a guy that hasn't had a whole lot of work in college but has shown those flashes and the ability to be dynamic when given the chance, I think that's what sets him apart.
Luke, you've done a ton of great work, and it's always a great read. Where can everybody keep up with all the stuff you're doing for the draft today and for the next few days, obviously?
Yeah, come see us at draftwire.usatoday.com. That's where we'll have all our content all night long into Friday. Friday will be a huge day where we'll be recapping the first round and previewing the rest of the way. As soon as Monday hits, we'll have a ton of stuff up for 2020, some early preview stuff, some names to know, that kind of stuff. So it's always draft season where we're at. Come find us on Twitter as well, at @TheDraftWire. I'm at Luke Easterling, and just talk to us throughout it, man. It's going to be fun.
Good luck. Don't forget to breathe tonight, buddy.
Hey, I'll do my best. Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you. That's Luke Easterling.
You're listening to The Drive.